Hey, what's going on there, guys? Nick here from Absolute MTG, and today we're going to be taking a look at Temur Midrange for the Khans of Tarkir season of Standard. So if I had to compare this deck to any other previous deck that has existed since Theros has came out, it would probably be just red-green midrange. This deck is basically the same thing, only with the addition of blue, so we can play Savage Knuckleblade, Temur Charm, Surrak Dragonclaw, and some other things in the sideboard. What's really sweet is you still get to play the same beaters that red-green monsters or red-green midrange likes to play, like Polukranos and Stormbreath Dragon. However, you just get a little bit more for the extra splash of the blue in here, and you're actually playing 3 playsets of heavy hitters now that we have Savage Knuckleblade in this deck as well. So to start things off, for our mana producers, we have a playset of Elvish Mystic, 1/1 for 1 green, taps for 1 green to our mana pool. We have a playset of Sylvan Caryatid, so 0/3 for 2 mana, and is going to provide any color of mana to our mana pool. We have a playset of Savage Knuckleblade, so our new addition from Khans of Tarkir, so 4/4 for 3 mana. And this guy's really sweet because even on turn 4 for us, if we want to have him have haste, maybe we miss a land drop or we don't have the appropriate color or something like that, we can still go and we can play him on turn 4 if we have the red mana available to us, and we can just give him haste, and he's a 4/4 for 4 mana with haste, which is still pretty sweet. He's able to pump himself for 3 mana, giving him +2/+2. We can only use the ability once, but even still a 6/6 beater is pretty good. And for 3 mana, 2 and 1 blue, we can bounce him back to our hand. So if our opponent's playing like End Hostilities or Perilous Vault or something like that, we can bounce him right back and then just recast him the following turn, hopefully give him haste, and smash. We have a playset of Courser of Kruphix, so 2/4 for 3. We play with the top card of our library revealed, and we can play the top card of our library if it's a land card, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we gain 1 life. So Courser lets us play lands off the top of our library, which essentially just gets us closer to the actual value spells that we want to be playing or that we want to be drawing. Just getting any amount of lands off the top of our library instead of playing them from our hand also allows us to, in a sense, kind of bluff cards in our hand and still retain a hefty hand size that would otherwise force your opponent to think a little bit differently or to weigh their options a little bit differently because you have so many cards in hand. We have a playset of Polukranos World Eater, so 5/5 for 4, and double X and 1 green for Monstrous X, where he is going to deal X damage to any number of creatures. Those creatures are going to deal damage back to Polukranos. So basically, Polukranos is going to eat smaller creatures. So if we go X value of 2, we can get rid of like 2 1 toughness creatures, and Polukranos is going to get bigger by a value of X. We have a playset of Stormbreath Dragon, so easily one of my favorite cards in this deck. The card's really good this season just because of cards like Siege Rhino and because of Wingmate Rock. So the Wingmate Rock can't block Stormbreath Dragon. The Stormbreath Dragon can easily block Siege Rhinos if we need to play this deck defensively. But the Stormbreath Dragon just in general as a 4/4 for 5 with flying, haste, and protection from white is great. It's monstrous for 3 for 7 mana is really great as well because it deals damage to our opponent equal to their hand size, and the Stormbreath is going to be a 7/7 that's going to hit in, so even like really late game whenever we have a ton of mana at our disposal, we're able to utilize all of that mana and just kind of pound our opponent if they're not able to actually deal with the Stormbreath Dragon. So it's one of the more resilient beaters that we have in this deck, along with Savage Knuckleblade. For our spells in the deck, we have Crater's Claw, so I'm playing 3 Crater's Claw in here, deals X to target creature or player for X and 1 red, and with Ferocious, if we control a creature with power 4 or greater, it's going to deal X +2 damage, so there's a lot of different manipulation you can do with math as far as the Crater's Claw is concerned, but ultimately, if we're kind of in a stalemate and we just need to deal a few points of damage, top decking a Crater's Claw while we have like either Knuckleblade or Polukranos or Stormbreath Dragon is pretty much going to assure us that we're going to finish off our opponent. We have 3 Lightning Strike, so the Lightning Strike is pretty sweet because it deals with so many creatures in the format right now. Mantis Riders, Glawbone Rabble-Masters, any other 3 or 2 toughness creatures as well. We can get rid of those, or we can just burn our opponent. So 2 mana, deals 3 to target creature or player. We have 2 Temur Charm. 1 green, 1 blue, and 1 red. Usually we are going to be able to counter spells or have our creatures fight. So our creature... we can have a creature get +1/+1 and it's going to fight another creature that we don't control. So in the case of like having Savage Knuckleblade fight a Siege Rhino and getting rid of it, we're able to do that pretty easily with the Temur Charm. We can counter spells unless our opponent pays 3. So it's essentially a mana leak for 3 mana, and we can also have creatures with power 3 or less. They can't block for the turn. So pretty effective as far as... being able to get around like Elspeth tokens or Courser of Kruphix or any cards like that if we have a developed board state and we want to get around what our opponent has as far as blockers are concerned. For the Planeswalkers of the deck, we have 2 Kiora. So Kiora is going to help us as far as our opponent's isolated threats. So if our opponent has like one card that is just beating us over and over again, maybe a Rhino or... maybe a Planeswalker that they have or something like that. We can have it not be able to deal damage to us. The card also is not going to receive damage, but just kind of isolating one thing away from our opponent and not letting them have that as a resource for dealing damage to us is pretty sweet. She can also allow us to draw an additional card and play an additional land with her minus ability. And then obviously her ultimate is just great because you get to make 8/8s every single turn and just develop a stronger board state. But Kiora is usually kind of a distraction. She's more so just something that can gum up whatever your opponent's trying to do as far as threats are concerned. But usually you're just kind of distracting your opponent with Kiora more so than anything else. Next we have Sarkhan the Dragonspeaker. So 4 loyalty, 5 cost. +1 is going to turn himself into essentially another Stormbreath Dragon for us that doesn't have Pro White but instead has Indestructible. So he turns into a 4/4 Flying Dragon with haste, and he's indestructible. So if your opponent has Murderous Cut or something like that, they're not going to be able to get rid of him. Downfall, of course, takes care of him before he turns into that dragon form with the +1, but otherwise he's still pretty sweet. His -3 is going to allow us to deal 4 damage to a creature, so can get rid of a lot of different things in the format, coursers and whatnot. So he's pretty sweet for that. And then his ultimate, which usually isn't as useful for us, is probably not something that you want to be doing with this deck unless you absolutely need to, where you're drawing 2 additional cards per turn, and then you're discarding your hand at the end of your turn. Usually I don't go for that. Usually it's you're going to try to beat down your opponent with the +1 ability, or you're going to try and stabilize or make your board state seem better with the -3. For the land base of the deck, we are playing 4 Wooded Foothills to be able to fetch up our forests or our mountain. We have 4 Frontier Bivouac to be able to provide any color of mana for us, although it enters the battlefield tapped. For our Pain lands, we have a playset of Yavimaya Coast and 2 Shivan Reef. And then for our Scry lands, we have 2 Temple of Epiphany, 2 Temple of Mystery, and 1 Temple of Abandon to allow us to scry off the top of our library and kind of manipulate what we're going to be drawing for the next turn. Now for the sideboard. So for the sideboard, we have a playset of Disdainful Stroke. So the Disdainful Stroke is really sweet because so many cards within the format are going to be 4 converted mana cost or greater, so we can get rid of like all the value planeswalkers that our opponent is trying to cast. Siege Rhinos, Wingmate Rocks, just there's so many things that you can sideboard this in against, even like in the control matchup whenever you're playing against Dig Through Times, Pearl Lake Ancients, and like if they're playing white Elspeths, you have a ability to counter all of those great spells and hostilities, Perilous Vaults. Disdainful Stroke just ends up being so good whenever you're playing against the slower decks that are more top heavy. We have one Clever Impersonator. So the Clever Impersonator is kind of interesting tech because initially, whenever the format was just kind of beginning out, everybody thought this card was going to see a massive amount of play. However, it didn't really see that much play, but I still actually really like it on the sideboard for those other value mid-range or good stuff mid-range decks, especially if they're like very Planeswalker based. The Clever Impersonator can become essentially anything that we want it to in the slower matchups. But playing against like Abzan, we can swing in with something and we can copy our opponent's Wingmate Rock, or we can go and copy an Elspeth. If your opponent just played an Elspeth Wrath to your board and you're left with nothing except a Clever Impersonator in your hand, you can copy that Elspeth and you can just play the racing game with them. Otherwise, like the Clever Impersonator is just great for any of the value matters type top-heavy decks. Pretty much like the same place where you would be siding in the Disdainful Stroke. We have two Surrak Dragonclaws. So kind of equally with the Stroke and the Clever Impersonator, this card is more for the matchups where your opponent is going to be playing something slower. They're going to be playing decks that could potentially be countering the things that you're actually playing, or they're going to try to gum up the board with a bunch of smaller creatures that can easily just chump block you for days. So Surrak is a 6/6 for 5. He has flash. He can't be countered. Creature spells you control can't be countered, and other creatures you control have trample. So pretty much everything that I've described as far as the elements of where you would want him, he has everything in his text box that is going to pretty much help us in those situations. So if we're playing against control, we can flash in Surrak Dragonclaw at the end of our turn, and our opponent is going to be forced to have to deal with them, or else like all of our spells are going to be uncounterable essentially, because creatures are usually the biggest things that matter to us. The fact that he gives our creatures trample as well is really sweet, because we can get past like Elvish Mystics and Caryatids and stuff like that our opponent may have back as blockers. Even if we're fighting against a Elspeth or something like that, maybe we have like a Courser or something like that, our opponent makes a bunch of 1/1s, and then we're able to flash in our Surrak and just be able to even trample over or force our opponent to assign blockers a little bit differently, just based on that trample that even like one or two of our creatures may have. But allowing our creatures to have trample in the case of like some of our bigger things like Knuckleblade, Polukranos, and Stormbreath Dragon, it's still pretty sweet. We have two Xenagos, the Reveler. So Xenagos is more for the decks that are going to be able to get rid of what we're doing. So the decks that have the availability for Wraths, like End Hostilities, and also like Elspeth, the Xenagos is pretty good for those matchups, just because we're able to produce so many creatures over the course of a couple of turns that oftentimes we're able to just kind of flood out the board. Even the fact that he creates mana for us with his +1 is pretty sweet in the case of like Stormbreath Dragon, where I've been able to easily monstrous the Stormbreath Dragon very quick just because of that +1 that Xenagos actually has. And usually whenever you're fighting against an opponent where nobody is really getting anywhere, you're just kind of developing board states, the fact that you get an extra 2/2 per turn that has haste and may be able to swing is still pretty sweet. We have one Keranos, God of Storms. So again, this is where we're siding it in to actually slow down our deck. It's another threat that we play against decks that have End Hostilities or have ways to get rid of our big value creatures. The Keranos is really awesome in situations where your opponent can get rid of everything except for cards like Planeswalkers or the Indestructible Gods, because every turn we're either going to draw an extra card if we are revealing a land off the top that we're drawing, or we are going to be able to hit our opponent for 3. So we get a free Lightning Bolt off Keranos if we are revealing a non-land spell. So the Keranos is great because he can hit down your opponent's Planeswalkers, he can take down their loyalties if that's what you're really having some trouble with, or you can just start bolting your opponent directly or getting rid of their creatures. And then the last cards that we have are for aggro. So we have two Magma Spray that are going to be for like the red slide decks, or even like the mono black variant aggros. Deals 2 damage to target creature. If that creature would be put into a graveyard this turn, remove it from the game instead. Useful for Bloodsoak champions, if anything. It's not really as relevant for exiling, but Bloodsoak champion is one thing that can recur itself over and over again based on combat. So Magma Spray is great for that. Otherwise, it's just an easy way to pin down aggro and not let them develop a huge momentum against you. And then a 3-of for Anger of the Gods. So Anger of the Gods dealing 3 damage to each creature. If a creature dealt damage this way would die this turn, exile it instead, so pretty much the same clause as Magma Spray. However, with Anger of the Gods, we're also going to be able to side it in for matchups like the Mono Green Devotion deck, because those decks are going to rely heavily on a lot of creatures that are like X2s or X3s. They have their Voyaging Satyrs, Elvish Mystics, Sylvan Caryatids, and cards like that. So our Anger of the Gods can get rid of pretty much everything like that. It can get rid of Eidolon of the Blossoms if they're playing that in their deck as well. Hornet Queen and the Hornet Queen tokens. So Anger of the Gods, really, really good against Mono Green, but otherwise is still really good up against like other token variant decks. It's somewhat alright against the Mardu tokens or the Mardu like mid-range decks, like the Rabble Master decks, and if they're playing like Hordeling Outburst or cards like that. If they're developing their board with tokens, Anger is still reasonable to side in for that matchup, and aggro is just kind of a given. So that is our Temur Midrange deck tech for you guys. If you enjoyed it, you can hit the thumbs up button and subscribe for more Magic the Gathering videos. But until next time, guys, thank you for watching, and we'll be back very, very soon.
If you guys want to keep up to date with everything that we have going on here at Absolute MTG, remember to hit that subscribe button, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter for all of your Magic the Gathering needs. Also, remember to check out our sponsors of the channel, MTG Madness and AVUgames.com. But as always, thank you guys for watching.